All right, Nick, let's talk about the Nebraska Cornhuskers and Matt Rhule. We really love what they're doing up there in Nebraska. I think there's a lot of really great things going on in this program. And I think Matt Rhule has done a tremendous job recruiting players to this program. But he can't do it by himself. And he can't always even rely on just his coaching staff as well. Sometimes got to get some players involved. And who better to get involved than Dylan Raiola, the man himself, to get some good players down or up rather to Nebraska. Let's get into this article and we can talk more about it on the other side. This, of course, is over on Corn Nation. It says the Polynesian pipeline is now a mainstream of the Husker recruiting machine with recent additions, and I'm probably going to butcher these, so I apologize. Samoan Polynesian names are tough. Offensive tackle Brian Tapu, 6'7", 295, and center Houston Kahahaini Torres, 6'3", 265. And the old adage of winning the game by dominating the line of scrimmage has never been truer, especially in a rough and tough Big Ten conference. These additions would not be possible without Raiola's, plural, leading the way both as a coach, Donovan, and the program changing quarterback, Dylan, influencing players to move far away from home. Polynesian players tend to commit to programs that understand the culture and brotherhood that is so important to them, which is why certain programs get the lion's share of these players. Nebraska has a smattering of Polynesian players in the past, but never in this quantity and quality, which can only mean good things for the future of Matt Rhule's line of scrimmage. The name that Raiola family holds both in Hawaii and the mainland will greatly influence any young player thinking of committing their future to a program. Nick, I think this is great news for Nebraska. I think anytime you can get some Polynesian players into your program, we've seen these guys dominate college football. We've seen them dominate in the NFL. It's just a different type of human being. They're gigantic, just some of the toughest guys that you see on the field. Curious what your thoughts on this one are, but Nebraska fan, I got an interesting question for you. Maybe a little bit untraditional, but who is your favorite Polynesian player in, college or the NFL that you can remember? I think there's a lot of really good options out there, but as we're talking about the Polynesian pipeline, maybe it's a guy that you would wish came to Nebraska. But who's your favorite Polynesian player that you can remember in the comment section below? But Nick, what are your thoughts on this new recruiting strategy by Nebraska?
So when I first saw this headline, as I'm sure you did, right? When you read it and you're like, Polynesian pipeline, that's a new one, right? Don't hear that talked a lot on ESPN or on 24/7 Sports or on 3 or whatever recruiting site. You don't hear those words coming really much, right? People talk about winning in Texas or Pennsylvania, California, Florida, whatever, right? Polynesian pipeline doesn't come up very much. And when I read that Matt Rhule and his strategy of getting Raiola and focusing on this too, along with his other recruiting targets, I was reminded of the longtime great NFL executive, Gil Brandt. He said this: if you do what everybody else does, you'll be mediocre when it comes to looking for talent. If you do what everybody else does, you'll be mediocre, just like everybody else. And during that time, Brand kind of pioneered modern scouting. He would go to like really tiny colleges and recruit people to the National Football League who would go on to be superstars. He was willing to look in different areas and do what other teams weren't willing or able to do, even though it makes sense, right? There's good football players at D1 AA, D2 level. People knew that going back, 60, 70 years, but teams just didn't put the time and effort to go after them. Gilbrandt did and had a lot of success. That's exactly the vibe I'm getting here from Matt Rhule. I feel like he's like, listen, there's a lot of talented players coming off of Hawaii or just from Polynesian descent in general. Why aren't we going after them, right? Why is only Oregon and Hawaii, it seems, maybe USC, putting any sort of serious effort into these guys, right? We're just as good a historical program. I mean, frankly, I put them ahead of Oregon historically. Certainly Hawaii, USC is up for debate, but reality, there's no reason that Nebraska can't get those guys. And I understand weather, culture, I get that. But it's clear if you set up a competitive environment with the right culture, the brotherhood mentality, which is clearly being established here, you can get it done. You can get these kids. And like you said, it's such a talented group of potential prospects. Why wouldn't you try and go after them? And that reminds me again of that quote: if you do what everybody else does, you'll be mediocre. But the corollary to that is if you're willing and able to do something that nobody else would consider, you have a chance to be great. And that is what we're seeing out of Matt Rhule in his recruiting strategy. He is willing to do what other programs wouldn't even consider. He's willing to quote the late great Steve Jobs, think different. And I think the impact that this will have on Nebraska, not just this specifically, although it will be good, but his overall mentality, his overall strategy will be huge for the long-term success of this Huskers program.
Yeah, Nick, and we talk about it, and I briefly kind of mentioned it, danced around it a little bit about how great Polynesian players have been. And, I think it's interesting, but, it's kind of an adage people say, but is it true? And I have a little bit of information. It's slightly dated, but I think the point still stands. I think it'd be even more reinforced nowadays, quite frankly. But if you look, this article from 2016, it says Polynesians, Native Hawaiians, and other Pacific Islanders make up 0.5% of the U.S. population. More than 200 Polynesians have played professionally in the NFL, making them 28 more times more likely to go pro than any other group of people. So I think what you get out of that is the Polynesian culture, those players that come play football, they're probably 28% more likely or 28 times more likely to
Yeah.
be an absolute monster on the field for your team, an NFL caliber of player. So I think this is a great pipeline to try to link in. And I think tapping in to your pretty much guy who's going to make it to the NFL, you can add him to the statistics already. And his dad's been to the NFL. So add that one into statistics. I think this was a great move by the Cornhuskers to utilize this and potentially give themselves a lot of really talented players.